Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Could those of you who've not yet sitting down, please move up front here. There's plenty of space. It really is a singular honor to welcome you to this first ever global conference on statelessness and inclusion. And you have come to The Hague, the city of peace and justice, in larger numbers than the organizers and myself thought possible. So that is the best position to start from that we have. So from day one, we have 300 participants, the max we could host, from more than 60 countries. You are giving off, I think, a very strong signal that dialogue, sharing of information, collaborative projects, and activism hold promise for the global statelessness and inclusion agenda. And looking at your backgrounds, it is clear that the indispensable element of inclusion is going to have a front row seat. There are lots of front row seats here for inclusion still available. And it deserves to be there because inclusion is about democracy. It is about the kind of societies we want to build, societies that do not include some to the exclusion of others. My name is Letitia van den Assem. I'm from the Netherlands. I have been a diplomat for many years of my life. I've served on 4 different continents. And I am at the moment, I call myself not a diplomat, but a diplomatic expert. And I'm very honored to be your host. I found it exciting to look through the list of all of your names, not mine, but your names and your backgrounds, your academics, your activists, your UN officials, government experts, artists, and even much more than that. So we have a wealth of knowledge and experience available over the next few days. Do make sure you use it to the max. This conference, it will really be up to you to decide what you make of it, how you use all the resources that are available, and how you discuss, that you discuss with others about what a broader movement for statelessness and inclusion might look like, and how it could come about, because in our final session, we will get back to that. But there is one group that I want to single out, and that is the group of what I would call experts by experience. The stateless participants amongst us, many of them who are also activists. I single you out for a special welcome. Your voices are critically important, and too often you are talked about and not heard. For some of you, it actually wasn't easy to come to The Hague. That is the sad reality that comes with your status. To be singled out for special treatment when you cross borders, even when all your papers are in good order. That distrust, that nasty sense of curiosity about what you are about is always there. And I especially look forward to interacting with all of you. I had a bit of a problem with the internet this morning, so my pages are a bit messed up. But I am sure that many of you have images that you see in front of you when you think of statelessness. I certainly do. And mine is an image of about 100 Rohingya women and children, amassed of the typically wonderful, bright colors of their clothes, yellow, saffron, orange, and peach. It sticks in my memory. It was December 2016, and I was a member of the Rakhine Advisory Commission, and our chairman, Kofi Annan, led us on a trip to Maungdaw, We had just arrived in a village that appeared completely empty. We were looking at the recent willful destruction of houses, schools, and mosques, when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this mass of women and children came running towards us from all directions. Our security detail, a military security detail, tried to stop them. And they looked like they were prepared to use force, but Anand told them off. The women surrounded us, and we heard what had happened when security forces ransacked their village, killed their husbands and sons, destroyed houses, schools, and mosques. They also spoke of sexual violence and lost livelihood. Anand stood there quietly and listened. He took his time. It was a lot of time he gave to the women to share their grief and grievances. And yet when I see that image in front of me, I realized, that the grief and the grievances and the sorrow were enormous, but what sticks in my mind is the defiance, the pride, the fact that these women were able to rush towards us, who were being protected by a military detail, and defied the risks, and made sure that they wanted to talk to Kofi Annan about what had happened to them. So every time I think of statelessness and exclusion, I see that mass of women and children in yellow, saffron, orange, and peach. To me, it's an instant reminder of the need to listen, and not only to listen, but to act. Over the next few days, we will be paying special attention to the Rohingya. Not only are they the largest group that is considered stateless, they are also victims of deliberate exclusion and violence on a massive scale. In 2018, the UN's independent international fact-finding mission found that the Myanmar military should be investigated and prosecuted for the commission of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Recent developments, and particularly over the past few days, make it clear that the few 100,000 Rohingya who are still in Myanmar remain under very severe threat. Today is the 6th day of a total internet blackout. It's unique, it has not happened before. And 2 days ago, when the UN High Commissioner of Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, spoke in Geneva, and also Yang Li, the Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Myanmar, they spoke and spoke out and said they were very worried about what was happening there in an area under total blackout. The first reports that we have been getting about what's been happening there do not make us very hopeful that, that the two populations, because this is not only about the Rohingya, but also the Rakhine people that live there, that they will come out unscathed. You will hear much more about the Rohingya over the next 3 days, both in the conference rooms and in the cancelled arts program. Now, before I start giving the floor to this morning's speakers, I want to express our sincere appreciation to all our sponsors. Without them, the conference and the cancelled arts program would not have been possible. They are the Sigrid Browsing Trust, the City of The Hague, the Oak Foundation, the Open Society Foundations, the Knowledge Platform for Security and Rule of Law, the Government of Canada, the Global Challenge Research Fund, and the Mondrian Fund. And the last one, the Arts and Design Research Center, of course. And now I think I can declare the conference opened and introduce Dr. Laura van Waas, who will be speaking on behalf of the organizers. Laura is a founder and co-director of the Institute of Statelessness and Inclusion. She's also an assistant professor at the University of Tilburg Law School, and she has been working on statelessness issues for more than a decade, both within academia and with UNHCR. But what I have seen of Laura over the past few weeks is total dedication to this conference. And she has high expectations of you. And she's going to tell you of her expectations. Laura, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. It's such an honor to speak at the opening of this conference and such a pleasure to have all of you with us for the next 3 days. I want to say a few words about the overarching theme of the conference, the idea that we are working together for inclusive societies. Letitia's already spoken a little bit about this, and I think it's important that we understand that what we're doing here is not just an interesting conversation or something that may spark a new academic article or something that gives us an idea for an advocacy campaign. It's really about trying to work out what it is we can offer, not just to the issue of statelessness, but to the problems that we face in the world today when it comes to inclusion. We have so much to offer by our focus on what has for so long been a blind spot. This idea that actually, hold on a minute, before you can start to talk about education, women's rights, so many of the other things that have much more international attention, have you checked the citizenship side of things? Because maybe it's the citizenship side of things that actually needs your attention first, or at least as well. So it's so exciting that all of you are dedicating all of your efforts and time and your energy and resources to come here today, but not just during the conference, but that you have chosen to take an interest in this issue, join a conversation about it. For many of you, dedicate your time, your existence to trying to work on this issue. We have a great deal to offer, and I hope that we can together start to even articulate more clearly what that is and work out a plan for action. The task ahead is actually enormous. As you will have seen from the Grand Challenges strand in our program, we are not talking about any easy issues here. We are talking about truly grand challenges. Many of them are deeply entrenched, deeply difficult, and deeply impactful. So these conversations are necessary. And the Rohingya has already been mentioned, and I'm sure we will come back to that already later this morning. But it's only one example of where we see not progress, but deterioration. I'm sure many of you can think of examples of a person who you really hoped had been helped by now, or a law that you really thought would have been reformed by now, or a practice that you really thought would have been banished by now. And yet here we are. I can think of plenty of examples of those kinds of situations. So much of this issue has got stuck. And where it isn't stuck, we can see slippage. We can see newly discovered enthusiasm with the power to deprive people of their nationality, to silence human rights defenders, to purportedly make us a more secure society. But we're undermining a value that is so important, not just to you and me and to the people affected, but to the way that we function, to democracy, to international relations. So I want to emphasize now that because you have a very severe task ahead of you. I'm delighted that so many people said congratulations as they hugged me this morning. And you know, I'm thrilled that we're all here. Genuinely, I am. But we are not here. This isn't the moment at which the hard work has been done. Yes, we have all had to go to great lengths to be here, to collect the resources, to free up the time. I know many of you have worked incredibly hard, and many of you have also had to encounter immigration processes and all sorts of difficulties. But the work starts now. The party starts Friday afternoon when we can relax and take a distance from it. But please take these 3 days seriously. Think about what you want to learn and what you want to share. So what I want to ask of you as my personal request is to do 3 things for me in these 3 days. The first is, I've already said it, work hard. So come with the thing that you've prepared. Make sure that people hear you. Don't drift off too much of the time. Draw all that you can from this pretty unique opportunity. There won't be another chance like this in the next few months or perhaps even the few years, because these are really unique opportunities. Second thing I'd like you to do, and Letitia's actually already touched upon this, is to listen and take in as much as you share. And for those of you who are used to listening and taking things in, share as much as you listen. Everyone here has got something to give and something to learn. So please be part of that 2-way process and go away with something new, but also knowing that you've given someone else something new. That's the only way we're going to make all of this work. And thirdly, this is the hard one. We have an enormous program spread across a crazy labyrinth of locations that I will talk about in a moment. There is a lot to choose from. Please try to seek out at least one session that you wouldn't normally, or one experience that you wouldn't normally. Maybe even one thing that actually you think, well, it's not really directly relevant to my work. Help us to help you to think outside the box, because there is so much on offer. Skills labs, the arts program. There are chances here to help you to maybe think through a problem by getting out of your usual thought process and your usual conversations. So try to do that at least once over the course of the 3 days. Now to some really exciting housekeeping. Has everyone got pen and paper? Okay. So there is lots going on. I've already said it. There's lots going on across different locations in the building. It will feel like a labyrinth today. You will get used to it pretty quickly. Make sure that you take the time today to leave to whichever sessions you want to find with a little bit of extra time just in case you get lost. Anyone who's involved in any way in the conference is wearing an orange key cord. We should all know the layout of the building, so if you're lost, find someone with orange and we'll be able to help you. There's also signs up everywhere. The event hall, is where all of the plenary sessions will take place. And the rest will make itself clear as you go along. Also, this is a closed conference, so please keep your ID cards on at all times. It's very important to us to ensure that you are in a safe space, especially for those who are taking some risk to be here and to participate. So please do make sure that you keep your ID cards for the full duration of the conference. The food is fully vegetarian. Anyone with special dietary requirements, things should be properly labeled. If in doubt, ask someone with an orange key card or just check at the registration desk at the front, which will always have someone from our team there. The rooms are different sizes. So we're currently in the largest room. Some of them are quite a bit smaller, which is good because you also want to be able to actually look at each other across the table for some of these discussions. Please note that we haven't requested registration for sessions in advance. If there's something you really want to go to, a skills lab you're desperate to join, make sure you're there first, and the rest will kind of sort itself out or negotiate with someone for a space. To help you find your way around and connect with people, hopefully many of you have already downloaded our, I don't know if it's Hoover or Wova, but the Hoover app. I saw that there was a lot of activity already on it before arriving here. If you haven't, please download it over the Wi-Fi if you can. You won't need it to find your way around. Any announcements that you all need to know about will be made in a different way, but it will help you to connect with other people who want to have a conversation. So I would really encourage using that. We are live streaming right now. Hi. So all of the plenary sessions taking place in this room will be live streamed, and we will also obviously capture the videos, and you'll be able to share them later on with your colleagues if you want to organize some kind of screening lunch when you go back home. All of that will be available through our website. If you have any questions, just let us know. There are also some roving reporters, and so there's a pop-up interview stand set up, so you'll see quite a few cameras around. As I said, we are aware that for some people this may present difficulties. I think that our team already knows who those people are. If you're unsure, about anything to do with interviews or Twitter, anything like that, please do come and speak to one of us, and we'll make sure that it's taken into account. There are a few sessions where we ask you not to share anything on social media about the speakers. That will be announced very clearly at the beginning of the session, so there shouldn't be any confusion around that. Other than that, as far as we're concerned, please make the noise as loudly as possible and share what's going on here with the people back home. Two final things. One is we are sitting in a museum. So if you go back through these doors and up the stairs, or you'll see there are other ways to get into it, including up the main stairs in the front, there's this beautiful communications museum with exhibits and experiences about fake news, about body language. If you just need a bit of time to think about something, or you need to cool down if it gets too hot, it's unbelievably well air conditioned for the purposes of the collection. Go and explore. You're free to use it. The building is ours for 3 days, so please do go and explore if you can. Finally, just to say that there will be an opening reception event this evening for anyone who still has the energy, which will take place at Humanity Hub. We will explain to people about how to get there. We can walk across or catch public transport across from here at the end of the day today. It's hosted by the City of The Hague, so it's in another location. If you haven't registered for that, again, please just come and speak to someone on our team, and we'll try to get that sorted out today. So there's a separate registration list. So I think that's all the housekeeping. And yeah, just to reiterate that I'm really delighted that you're all here, and please work hard so that we can say a proper congratulations at the end of the week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, for that introduction. I was watching the room and people were starting to look very energized, knowing that a lot is expected from them. I would now like to introduce David Cottrell, who of the Cancelled Arts Program. And I spoke with you this morning about the Cancelled Arts Program, and people are still a bit confused, but I think that's the idea. There is a surprise factor involved there. But I'll invite David to say a few things about it. He is an installation artist who works across media and technology to explore the social and political tendencies of a world at once shared and divided. And his work has been shown around Europe, in the US, and Asia. David, please.
It's quite humbling to be here. This is a very important event. And as an artist, I probably never expected to have a chance to address a room like this. I'm here representing an extraordinary team of people that have been committed and engaged to work with Laura and Amal in the build-up to this conference, to see it as a rare opportunity for artists to become more aware of statelessness, for stateless artists to have a chance to have their voices and their subjective understandings of the experience to be transmitted to a wider community. For artists maybe that have methods and ideas and ways of working which should be applied more importantly to issues like this, to be engaged and encouraged, to recognize there is a community of people out there that are like them and that respect them and that would be glad to engage in some kind of fellowship with them. This is an inherently interdisciplinary subject, and it affects people regardless of their background, their education, their knowledge. It can be something which is sort of, it's an eclectic community of individuals having life experiences challenged through structural failures. It's kind of fitting in a way that ISI have been so brave as to try and kind of think about how do you make the conference epitomize a kind of interdisciplinary conversation. And at a time when we recognize that around the world there are issues which are causing us to become more pessimistic about the way in which our countries are governed and by the impact of the global organizations that should have the power to mitigate for the weaknesses of leadership in other places. At a time when we begin to, where the global challenges are discussed in academia and where the grand challenges will be discussed here, but it feels in a way that there's a missing link in terms of policy, in terms of trying to actually affect the change which so many people seem to recognize is so obviously needed. At a time when there is impasse, where there are conversations which have stalled, maybe methodologies have not quite led to the results that we would have expected them to have led to, with such goodwill and such intelligent, thoughtful people with benign intentions engaged to try and address legal anomalies, issues of citizenship, issues of governance, and issues possibly more widely of solidarity amongst communities, and kind of trying to undermine and pull back from polarization and nationalism. Perhaps it's good to look at a closed environment like this as an experimental laboratory where people can kind of try and engage with new ways of discussing ideas, changing the boundaries in which we might find people that relate to the subjects and the causes that we care about, and hopefully surprise ourselves with maybe coming up with new ways of developing an empathetic understanding and maybe developing new vocabularies to share that empathetic understanding with people beyond this building. The Cancelled Art Programme has a kind of unusual name, and I think it's a great act of generosity that it appears on your lanyards as well as in our minds. The Cancelled Art Programme was the subject of great debate internally, whether it was the right word. It was rooted in the idea that something has to exist to be cancelled. Any entity that has been cancelled does exist in the world, but we're denied access to it. We're somehow kind of, the entity itself is denied agency, and we're denied the possibility of making our own opinions or challenging our own preconceptions. To be cancelled is a violent act. It's not often used in terms of people, but when we were learning more about statelessness, because although Amar and Laura and everybody on this panel, this has been the center of their lives for many years, for some of us, it's something which we have learned through them. We came to think that maybe there was some relevance in that word. It's kind of thinking in a way about something which is not simply a legal anomaly, but something which maybe for those which have very little understanding of the complexities of this, of the constructs which can cause statelessness to exist, a very simple term like cancelled might be helpful. It's simply an umbrella, in this case, to try and incorporate the pluralism of activities that the arts might possibly have to offer. And what we're looking at here is not to provide an exhibition that runs alongside the conference, but more to try and find a way in which artists can meaningfully learn from yourselves and possibly also offer new insights, new questions, and maybe stir up conversations which benefit from being invigorated with sometimes naive and sometimes beautiful comments. We have within the program 5 strands. We have artists making new work that have come here from Nepal, from Palestine. We have artists that have come here specifically to try and engage with the subject which they have knowledge of, but also to try and develop understandings of a better way in which they can divert their practice towards creating impact within this field. We also have artists, we're creating an archive of artworks. Over 70 artists have been included in this so far, of artists which possibly are well known within their communities, maybe known amongst activists or by other artists, but possibly are isolated because of the structural limits of where they work, and trying to begin to collate something of a network of these arts. We're looking at poetry, we're looking at filmmaking, we're looking at installation art, and contemporary practice. Within the conference, you'll find things which are performed and things which you'll encounter which may surprise you, and other things which you'll recognize that's probably a piece of artwork. But the whole point of this, in a way, is to try and remove the boundary between art practice and other forms, and try and see if there's something where we bring ourselves together, all sides benefit from something which is more of a collaborative conversation. We have the program extends into the city through the relationship with Creative Court, and it extends into the conference in ways that we will gradually discover through the experiment. It's an interesting, complex, methodological experiment in itself, and I'm very grateful to you all for being part of it, and also for engaging with the program and possibly challenging the artists over the next few days. Thanks very much to Mara, Laura and Letitia for letting us be part of it.
Thank you, David, and I was happy that you persevered in the use of the word cancelled, because the first time I read it in the program, I thought the program's cancelled, and then you start to think, and I think that was probably the idea. We now have a short film made by a group called United Stateless. It's a grassroots group in the United States of stateless activists. They have organized themselves to advocate for their rights. Unfortunately, none of them can be here in person today because they don't have travel documents. But they did send us a special video message that we really want to share with you now. Can we sit over?
We are a national organization led by stateless people, the first of its kind in the United States,
whose mission is to build and inspire community among those affected by statelessness and to advocate for their human rights.
We lived very solitary, lonely lives of being stateless people in the United States.
I was surprised by diversity of stateless people in this country who came from all over the world.
And I belong to ethnic Rohingya, the world's most persecuted people. And I was born and raised in Burma. In order to escape from persecutions, I lived in Malaysia without having any status, and finally I was resettled to USA as a refugee.
Came to the United States as a high school exchange student at age 16. Shortly after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was unrest and violence at home, and I ended up staying in the United States. My home country still considers me a citizen of the Soviet Union, which no longer exists.
I'm born from Eritrean father and Ethiopian mother. I came to the United States, asked political asylum. The court denied, and I went back to the Ethiopian embassy to find out I'm stateless. They denied my passports.
I became stateless when my parents fled the Soviet Union to apply for asylum. I was only 4 years old. They were denied. The Ukrainian embassy did not recognize us as its citizens, even though I was born in the place that Ukraine replaced.
I was born in the Soviet Union, and by the time this country collapsed, the new country created new nationality law. Russian-speaking ethnic minorities become stateless. And I came to the United States with the word stateless in my documents.
I was born stateless. I'm originally from Kuwait. We didn't know that the United States did not have a stateless law that could help us.
Despite numerous attempts and a marriage to a U.S. citizen, I have been unable to adjust my status. Several years ago, I learned that my father was dying, and I made a heart-wrenching decision to deport myself to be by his side. I was denied deportation. My father died in 2015, and I have not seen my mother or sister in 24 years.
I could not pursue my education. I was fortunate enough to be eligible for the DACA program, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It also took me 8 different lawyers to go through to find out exactly what I'm eligible for, which also reflects how the legal community does not understand statelessness in the U.S.
I spent $50,000 on lawyers for the past 10 years and still no solution. I'm a taxpayer and I can't open a bank account, I can't get a driving license, I can't report crime.
Stateless people live in fear of detention all the time.
All stateless persons in limbo in the country are at risk of detention, currently detained or under an order of supervision.
I don't wish anyone to be in my position. I help others because I don't want them to go through this experience.
In the United States, there is no solution to statelessness. Decision makers need to recognize that there are stateless people in the United States.
Our goal is to influence the lawmakers so that stateless people can become citizens of the United States.
United Stateless is working to identify stateless detainees, to connect with the legal aid community, and to provide letters of moral support and financial support if possible.
We are working together to our vision to end statelessness in the United States. We are the experts of how to solve this problem. We are part of the solution, and I am proud to be part of United Stateless.
United Stateless gave me a sense of community that I never felt before. When people together and when they have a chance to fight for their human rights, it already brings them a sort of power.
Being a part of this group has been incredibly uplifting and empowering to change the narrative of my life, from being a victim to being someone who can, in fact, affect change.
Hague at the World's Conference on Statelessness and Inclusion. We are
United Stateless.
We unfortunately could not be with you there today.
Because we are not able to obtain travel document from United States or any other state in the world.
Because we are
Stateless.
I think I speak on behalf of all of us when I ask the organizers to convey to us our sincere appreciation for the message that was made, especially for this conference, because it really drives home the day-to-day problems that many stateless people experience, and in the case of these people, you know, forever. I mean, there is no ready solution for them. And that is something that, you know, particularly when we think of activism to change legislation, to help people change their status, I think is an extremely important task that many of you know all about, but should share amongst yourselves so that more can be assisted. We move on with the program now. And the next speaker is Mariette Schuurman, a former colleague of mine. She's the Netherlands Ambassador for Human Rights. She was also ambassador to Macedonia. She was the NATO Secretary General Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security. And before taking up her present position, she was based in The Hague as a chief coordinator for the membership of the UN Security Council. Also worth mentioning, I think, is her experience in conflict areas such as Sudan and the Great Lakes region that are of direct relevance to some of our discussions. She will speak on behalf of the host country, and we're very honored to have you with us, Mariette.
Thank you, Letitia. And really, I will keep it short because I understood well from that we're supposed to work, so no procrastination. And I'm eager to listen to Radhika Kumaraswamy, who I think first met in Brussels in the NATO headquarters, which is a very uncommon place for Radhika. She did very well. And when she speaks, you understand why. But just basically to welcome you on behalf of the host country, the Netherlands, on behalf of Minister Sigrid Kaag, who unfortunately is abroad, so she couldn't be here personally, and to welcome you to The Hague. We are very happy and honored that this conference takes place in The Hague. As you know, The Hague is proud to call itself the international capital of justice and peace. And this conference very much, you know, fits to live up to that promise. But obviously we have to work to earn the title. I'm very much impressed with the number, obviously, of people attending here who are willing to work, but also diversity in background and experience. And we'd like to thank you for coming here and sharing and learning from each other these days. I'm also impressed when I went through the program of the increased, I think, increased diversity of statelessness situations, from the ones that we have at the forefront of our minds, like the Rohingya crisis, Myanmar, to the ones that are not on our radar screen and far unknown, like the Nubian and Pemba communities in Kenya. But also from situations of refugees who want to return home, to people who are actually in their country of birth and ancestry, but have inherited statelessness from generation to generation, and are in this sort of eternal cycle of poverty handed down from generation to generation. And finally, I'm very eager to be here, obviously, and to learn from what we can do better. To learn from your out-of-the-box thinking and creative thinking here in terms of policy and practices. As international community, but also as the Netherlands. For us, as you know, for me as a diplomat in foreign affairs, what should we do to make sure that statelessness is not only an issue for our lawyers or consular departments, but really mainstreamed, part and parcel of, let's say, sort of, how do we build a sort of statelessness awareness and literacy for people also dealing with conflict prevention, with humanitarian aid, with development cooperation, with access to basic social services, with equal rights, and all related files. So how do we better make sure that we're aware of the impact of statelessness on the work that we try to do? And then as a government also in the Netherlands, a better world also starts at home. And that is very much for this issue as well. I just learned that in the Netherlands still 55,000 people do not have their nationality confirmed. And the majority of those are not formally registered as stateless, so they lack access to the special procedures that the government has in place to protect stateless people. And so currently there's work being done to get, to remove that backlog and to make sure that the people that have been in limbo for far too long, like the people in the video clip, are getting out of that situation. And to make sure that I think that they don't risk to become or to remain invisible. And also from my work on human rights, as human rights ambassador, I really learned that being invisible is probably the most dehumanizing experience a human being can have, and its consequences of access to rights and services. But invisibility is, as I said, is really a major challenge. And it's great to see also the relation here and during the conference with communication, with images, with art. So that all the work we do is basically to give a face to the invisible, and to see what we can do better and more creatively to get them out of this status of invisibility. Maybe finally, inclusion was mentioned also by Titia, and I think it's the core concept also when it comes to equal access to equal rights, basically. And obviously the global agenda that we have, to the global commitment that we made as international community to build just, peaceful and inclusive societies is the sustainable agenda, the sustainable development agenda, sustainable development goals. And the Netherlands is a staunch supporter of that agenda. And obviously, the sustainable development agenda is fundamentally a rights agenda, an agenda for equal rights and opportunity for all across the world. And it affects obviously also the stateless people, and some SDGs more than others, like SDG 5 on gender equality, SDG Gen on reduced inequalities, but also SDG 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions. Goal 16.9 on legal identity is also part of the program. But I would like also to raise 16.3, which is on equal access to justice for all. Because Minister Kaag is a co-chair of the International Task Force on Justice, who looks specifically on how to deliver on that promise of equal access to justice for all. And it's particularly important for the stateless. The report that is launched, we had a conference on access to justice at the beginning of the year, and the report that the International Task Force on Justice delivered this year estimates that about 253 million people are in conditions of severe injustice, mainly because of high levels of insecurity, which make it impossible to seek justice, but also because of phenomena like modern slavery and statelessness. And an estimated 12 million are indeed stateless, and the majority, again, not registered or recognized as such by governments, and hence lacking any formal status. These people are highly vulnerable to human rights abuses. They are often at the hands of the authorities in the countries they live in. They are extremely limited in their ability to seek justice and often unable legally to work, to own property, to marry, to register births of their children, etc. And I think it is great to see that also this conference today is to see what we can do to, as I said, to give those invisible a face and to think outside the box in terms of how we can make them visible. So I wish you all a very empowering and inspiring conference, and I hope really that some creative ideas comes from this diversity of thoughts that we have here in the room, with also the help of cancelled art. So I wish you a very good conference, and thank you for being in The Hague.
Thank you very, very much, Mariette, for that powerful message. And you said something important, which is that no government should think that it doesn't have problems. Many people in the Netherlands, until recently, really didn't know that the Netherlands had a problem with statelessness, and that, as you indicated, there are certain procedures here that are so desperately slow that at the national level, that 3 municipalities, including The Hague, have joined hands and say, we are going to do something about it, because this is about people who have an unidentified, who labeled as unidentified nationality. And they want to apply for statelessness, because once you have statelessness, you have a lot of rights. Well, and it is, I think, important that the Netherlands now realizes that it has to do something. And I really also want to thank the International Institute of Statelessness and Inclusion for being so forceful and putting this on the Dutch agenda. Laura, the activist, thank you. I would now like to have the honor to introduce our keynote speaker. She arrived from Sri Lanka yesterday, and we're very, very honored to have her with us today for the keynote. She trained as a lawyer in Sri Lanka and went on to become a diplomat and a human rights advocate. She chaired her own country's Human Rights Commission, and she became one of the best known women to serve the United Nations, and went on to become Under-Secretary General. She was special representative for children in armed conflict. And in 2017, she was appointed as a member of the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on Myanmar. And her work will be relevant. Her experience is relevant for us in many areas, but right now she is still very active on the issue of the crimes committed against the Rohingya. And what I appreciate, I think, in you, Radhika, is that when I looked at your CV and I thought, you go back and forth, you keep your bond with Sri Lanka, and that is so important, because too many international activists seem to know everything that is wrong in other countries, but never look at their own problems. And I know that you do not do that. You have remained a powerful voice, and actually, your voice rang out very strongly in the recent aftermath of the terrible bombings of the 21st of April. And that, I think, is a lesson for all of us who are international civil servants or diplomats, government representatives, NGO representatives. Always focus your eye on your own country first, and then see what is happening elsewhere. Radhika, may I invite you? We're really honored to have you with us.
I think I'm a little too short for this podium. But, no, I'm fine. Just to say, first to thank the organizers for what I would call a very imaginative program, not only a good program, but a very imaginative program. And I think the material, especially produced by the cancelled arts section, was truly intrigued me. Let me just talk about this issue of statelessness. The United Nations Charter begins, "We the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war." Yet the structure and decision-making of the United Nations gives centrality to the nation state. Increasing number of individuals around the world are falling between the cracks of "we the peoples" and the contours of the nation state. In these cracks is a subterranean world where individuals exist without formal rights, many living just above survival. They are most often at the receiving end of arbitrariness and caprice on the part of state authorities. Theorists sometimes call this subterranean world a state of freedom, to be undefined by the identity, duties, and obligations of a nation state. But in real life, for most people living in these cracks, life is marginalized and vulnerable, where one faces existential threat on a daily basis. It is a site of danger and precariousness, though some people have found agency through powerful mobilization. Statelessness is one aspect of the subterranean space, a space they share with persecuted minorities seeking asylum, internally displaced persons, victims of trafficking, victims of smuggling, human smuggling, undocumented and irregular migrants. The categories are sometimes fluid and overlapping. Statelessness is defined and is a challenge to the structure of the nation state in modern times. In its initial definition by Oppenheimer in 1912, it was defined in the negative as a people destitute of nationality. Statelessness is no longer the exception in the world. It has become endemic to the existence of a nation-state system. Stateless people are treated with suspicion as people in between, without a clear identity or belonging. It is a status that elicits racism and xenophobia of the worst sort and threatens home communities in a fundamental way. It is often the symptom and the cause of discrimination. As the Roma have shown us through the years, statelessness is a status of profound marginalization, keeping individuals out of the complex and sometimes enabling relationship citizens have with their nation state. For some, statelessness is existential, where an imagined state remains in people's minds, and the desire to have that state captures the imagination. They then mobilize the political agency to make it real. The Palestinians, many Sri Lankan Tamils, and the Kurds are an example of a people with an imagined community and an imagined state. As a result, their statelessness and marginalization is deeply political and creates great anxiety, adding another layer of complexity to the many ways of dealing with statelessness. Stateless people are always the stranger, the other, often even when they have moved beyond their status and received citizenship or even great success. This otherness will often stay with them for the rest of their lives and into the next generation as stateless people and their children negotiate their place within and outside their home countries. In some ways, statelessness is purely a problem of modernity, as the rise of nation-states has been with us only for about 2 centuries. Citizenship is the primary construct of the nation-state. It entitles the recipient to some rights and benefits and certain obligations, such as military service. In earlier times, the Greek city-states clearly had the demarcation between citizens and slaves. While privileging one group, they disenfranchised another. In modern times, people like Hannah Arendt took this construct forward to hook statelessness to the regime of human rights. Though this has always been a welcome development, the Convention on Statelessness came into existence before all the major developments in modern human rights law. Statelessness has also been at the crossroads of human rights law and international humanitarian concerns between the concepts of protection and rights. The framework of protection, based on the do no harm principle, aims at providing a safety net of protection for stateless and other vulnerable people. A rights framework is a framework of entitlement, advocacy, and accountability. The early era of statelessness was very much about protection, but we are increasingly seeing the problem of statelessness from a rights perspective. There are still those who resist a rights perspective to these issues of statelessness. The fluidity of categories in the world of non-citizenship, the repression and the backlash that they could face, the need to understand local conditions and particularities have pushed some to argue for a case-by-case resolution of conflict rather than moving toward general principles of rights. Others feel we should not reify the concept of nation-state and its particular framework of rights, but work to undermine the oppressive nature of the modern state and work toward alternative forms of governing ourselves. These arguments are valid, but given present times, there's a felt need to strengthen the framework of rights, at least I feel, enjoyed by stateless people, at least in the short term. The real-life material situation requires nothing less. As I looked out onto Cox's Bazar, onto an endless boundary of polythene sheets confined to a small space and a sea of faces that were expressionless, the kind of look people have when pain is deep and despair so overwhelming, the impulse was to help them immediately, to enable, entitle, and empower them, embolden them. A lifetime of theorizing on human rights was just forgotten. Instead of conceding or being overwhelmed by the fluid nature of the concept of statelessness, many lawyers want instead a tight legal definition and very definite responses on the part of nation-states and the international community. They want to bring a plethora of rights, even if there is no citizenship, and a reform to nationality law and a restructuring of the state, especially at the local level, so that it is able to deliver services. For stateless people and all others who are similarly situated, the law, the bureaucracy, and documentation are their never-ending struggles with life. When I interviewed an old lady from Rohingya community in Cox's Bazar, she brought forward this dirty plastic bag, and from it she pulled out one identification that card that certified her grandparents' Burmese citizenship in the 1950s, another that limited her rights, another that took away her citizenship, and finally what is called a verification card that gives her some rights and not citizenship because she agreed to be called a Bengali Muslim and not a Rohingya. She had left all her furniture, clothes, and jewelry behind in northern Rakhine and only clutched this plastic bag to her bosom as she fled. Such are the power of documents in the modern world. The term statelessness first appears in international instruments at the time of the League of Nations and the Convention on certain questions relating to the conflict of nationality, protocol relating to a certain case of statelessness. Once the United Nations was created, the process for formulating a convention on statelessness moved to this new institution. It would be inevitable that an organization that is structured around nation states would be keen to demarcate its borders and define the gaps so that its integrity is not threatened. An ECOSOC resolution was passed, a study was commissioned, followed with an ad hoc drafting committee. So in 1954, the convention relating to the status of stateless persons emerged, accompanying the convention relating to the status of refugees, or the Refugee Convention. The convention continued to define stateless in a negative way. The term stateless person means a person who is not considered a national by any state under the operation of law, an echo of destitute of nationality. Universal human rights as a concept and practice only took off after the 1960s. Until then, the nation state and nationality were the only factors that mattered for a person's identity and rights. Today, the global campaign to end statelessness, led by UNHCR, aims at strengthening human rights within this framework, reforming nationality law, and advancing the Convention to protect the stateless. It is a hope that a reformed convention becomes like the other treaty bodies with an implementing committee that can follow up on state obligations with regard to the stateless. Given the climate prevailing today, this is an uphill struggle. The convention and the general legal framework with regard to statelessness has been criticized as not being holistic enough to define the stateless community as it stands in the world today. Because it was born in the pre-judicial era, it does not regard the change of thinking with regard to nationality and give full access to civil and political rights. Constitutions and laws used to have access to rights based on whether you were a citizen or a person. Increasingly, in areas such as education and health care, access is now being opened to persons with or without citizenship. Activists want the full plethora of rights, or the vast majority of rights, to be enjoyed equally by both citizens and persons. Statelessness and nationality law and citizenship have a fundamental bearing on women and children's identity and their place in the world. For a long time, the vast majority of countries required the wife and children to take on the nationality and citizenship of the husband and father. Nationality law was also primarily based on blood and descent, and one could not acquire nationality on objective criteria that were a precursor to citizenship. So once a woman married, she had to take on her husband's domicile, his nationality, and his citizenship if she wished to belong to a state. Her children also received their domicile status, their nationality, and their citizenship from their father. These laws were justified by earlier theorists as being necessary for the maintenance of family unity. The international community is particularly concerned with children. The Convention posits the right of a child to acquire a nationality. Article 9 speaks to refraining states from separating children from their parents. This becomes profoundly relevant in what is going on in the United States. Article 10 points to the need for speedy reunification. When turmoil occurs, parents send their children out first in an attempt to save their lives. I remember being at the Kenya-Somalia border, watching groups of children holding hands and crossing the border without any adults. The issue of granting citizenship to the children and not to the parents who cross later has been raised many times. But the Convention on the Rights of the Child points to a speedy reunification that it feels is in the best interest of the child. The presence of a large number of children in the stateless category raises the issue of the need for the provision of basic services like education and health. Modern refugee camps set up by UNHCR have this in mind, and learning spaces, health and education, and even play areas have been part of the camp's design. However, a camp can usually provide only basic facilities, and host communities vary on how they will pick up the pieces. Prejudice and discrimination often prevent stateless children from receiving the minimum welfare benefits that would meet their very basic needs. The right to education and health are probably the most important of the international human rights guaranteed by the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. We can talk about rights and frameworks for the stateless in the abstract, but what do they mean in real life? I'm a member of the United Nations fact-finding mission on Myanmar. I have watched these issues and witnessed them play out in real time over the last 2 years. These are heartbreaking issues, and one is never really quite the same after experiencing and seeing the impact forced statelessness has on the lives of the people you meet. The Rohingyas are very firm in stating to us that they are not stateless. They have a state and a country, and it is Myanmar. That state has decided to deny them their basic rights, and from this basic disenfranchisement comes the rest of the horrific troubles they have to face. At the core of their struggle is the problem of citizenship and enforced statelessness. The first identity issue they face is that the Rohingyas are not allowed to choose their name, a name that has defined them through many centuries of Burma's history, so much so that the founder of modern Burma, Aung San Suu Kyi's father, had them sit at the peace table and included them in the first constitution. Over time, they lost their nationality and the right to be included as one of the nationality races of Myanmar. They lost their citizenship as well, especially after 1982 and the citizenship law. The main purpose was to make them lose their legal status without guarantee of another status or citizenship in another country, to force them to fall into the cracks of statelessness. Being stateless within Myanmar, they are denied the very basic of rights. They are denied the freedom of movement between villages and townships under a very repressive travel authorization scheme. As a result, their access to food is also restricted. If I am not mistaken, Northern Rakhine has the worst malnutrition rate in the world. Today, Rohingyas in Myanmar have some access to primary education, but very little access to secondary education and virtually no access to tertiary education. They have little access to health care, and with the restriction on travel, they cannot seek quality health care really of any kind. In recent times, with extraordinary rumors afloat, the sexuality and reproductive rights of the Rohingyas are also being regulated. The agitation of the Ma Bata movement has borne fruit in the Rakhine. There are now discriminatory restrictions on procedures for marriage authorization if one were to marry a Rohingya man. Restrictions on the number and spacing of children, and denial of access even to birth registration. A more vicious system cannot be found anywhere in the world. The Rohingyas who crossed over to Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh are also treated as stateless. There are nearly 1 million of them in the smallest possible space. Cramped living accentuates the sense of deprivation, but does not dampen hope and expectations. When we first went there, just after the massive violence of August 2017, the desperation, the sadness, and the tragedy that we saw was overwhelming. We knew we would never be able to meet their expectations, and we did not. But they were grateful that the mission came back to report back and give them our findings. They are much more organized now, and their questions of what next with accountability, has the international community failed us, are questions that still have to be answered. The international community is obsessed with wanting the Rohingya to return to northern Rakhine from Cox's Bazar. The issue of safety and security is the only factor that is considered. However, what are they to return to? Most of their villages have been bulldozed without a tree standing. In terms of status, they will be stateless and may have to subject to a regime still operating for the Rohingyas in the Myanmar. That is no freedom of travel, paltry health facilities, bare minimum education, and a regulation of their reproductive rights. The government is offering what they call a verification card, which they say could be a pathway to citizenship. To get that card, they have to call themselves Bengali Muslims, a blatant attempt to forcibly eradicate the Rohingya identity from Myanmar territory. An old man I interviewed on my last trip to the Cox's Bazar symbolized the tragedy of statelessness to me. He was about 80 years old. He came in a long salwar, pants, and a cap, sporting a beard that the Taliban has made fashionable. The fact that I was a woman did not bother him. He was immediately at ease. Born to a generation of Muslim men where women's bodies, identities, and dress were not a major hallmark of their religion. He was a child of newly independent Burma, and he remembered the good old times. While the young people in Cox's Bazar were restless for a new life, without an ease of belonging, he had no doubt that he belonged to Burma. He remembered the smell of the earth, his relationships with his ethnic Rakhine friends, their lives, the tensions, and shared warmth. When he recounted the events that led to his displacement, trauma had merged truth with fiction, and he could not face the fact that he had been driven away. He was determined to show that his people stood strong and did not just leave. He describes scenes of battle that could have only come from the heroic stories he would have been told as a child of Rohingya nobles who were advisors to the Rakhine kings. Statelessness was a meaningless concept in describing this man. He was the living memory of the Rohingya people. His life was so intertwined with post-independent Burma that to take that identity away from him was to destroy his very being. His presence in the refugee camp is an absolute crime. Finally, statelessness is then a political, social, economic, cultural, and psychological experience. It is a subset in the world of migration that has become the most important human rights issue of our time. It is experienced in that subterranean world, as I said, shared by illegal migrants, undocumented migrants, irregular migrants, refugees, internally displaced, people who have been smuggled or trafficked. Some have come voluntary, others have been forced by the reality of their experience. Their life experience can never be fully understood in legal document or a UN report. The intensity is best captured in movies and plays, where tragedy is palpable and the narrative complex. Capernaum, or Chaos, that won the Cannes Jury Prize last year and received a standing ovation, is one such movie and stars a Syrian refugee child actor. Directed by Nadine Labaki, it captures the precarious nature of life, the defining elements of bureaucratic documents, and the danger and pathos of living in that subterranean world where human life does not matter and dignity is never taken for granted. But we must not always fill our work with only pathos. Capernaum ends on an upbeat note, and there are many people from that subterranean world who by sheer grit and endurance have made a good life as workers, professionals, businessmen, artists, and politicians. From Karl Marx to Albert Einstein to supermodel Imam, there are thousands of inspiring stories of people who lost everything only to becoming outstanding people in their own right. Our purpose must therefore be to provide a framework to allow that to happen, to empower them with rights, enable them, to dignify them, and to provide them with space and their voice to make their way in this world. In some contexts, like Rohingyas, it looks like an impossibility, but no situation is static. It is never a question that a people will be free. It is only a question of how and when. It is our job to try and speed up that how and when. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that very important and moving statement that you gave here. I think it's really has meant a lot to many of you. Many of you will have recognized the stark realities that you have encountered yourselves or that you have come across in your work. I could say a lot more about it because I feel very strongly about what I said, but we have what I would like to say. But more importantly, we still have about 20 minutes for Q&A between all of you and the people sitting here. And I think we should that should get priority. So, unfortunately, we will not have you with us tomorrow. We only have Radhika Kumaraswamy with us today. It's an honor and a privilege to have you for a full day. But here is your chance to ask her and all the others here. Yes. Can you state your name and your...
I'm Mohammed Al-Badri Al-Anazi from the Kuwaiti Bidoon movement. So my question is to Ms. Mariette. I see that the European countries and the West countries deal with the stateless people who's coming to claim as a refugee, as here as a stateless, but they deal with them as a refugee. Statelessness itself is a real problem. And not all of the stateless people have danger or thing for their life because they are refugee. And I believe there are a law, which is 1954, which is deal with the stateless people to give them right to claim as a stateless. But I can see that the European countries, the Western countries, even in Australia, they deal with them as a refugee, and it's difficult for them to make it really, to deal with it as a refugee, and they lose their rights and their claim as a refugee. So what can we do for that? How can we make them deal with them as a stateless people? They prove that they are stateless people, then they have guarantee to be indefinite leave to remain in this country, which is they are claiming as a refugee, without calling themselves as a refugee. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think also Laetitia mentioned that also in Europe and also in the Netherlands, we have a huge task in, first of all, being aware of the rules and procedures that we have when it comes to acknowledging the difference in status between statelessness and refugees. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, first to work with the backlog that's there, but also to make sure that officials in charge, have a proper understanding of what the specific challenges are and the different rights are as well. And that's, I think, why the work of ISI is so important, to increase that awareness, also in host countries, of the special status of stateless people and the rights that they have in the system that we have, but we don't use it to its full extent.
Maybe just to briefly add and to borrow from a term that you used actually that I really like, it's about statelessness literacy. And as Radhika pointed out, the Statelessness Convention that you also mentioned from 1954, it's a sister convention with the Refugee Convention. But something happened along the way, and the Refugee Convention went on to develop into domestic law and procedure and jurisprudence and academic debate, and the Statelessness Convention didn't. But that is changing at an unbelievable pace. And over the last 10 years, a huge amount of progress has been made in terms of statelessness literacy. The question now is, how do we turn that into actually what needs to happen? And it's those kinds of questions that we hope that by kind of collectively brainstorming, we can work out what some of the pathways for that are. But we have the building blocks now, which we didn't even have 10 years ago.
We have a roving microphone at the back. Let's take someone from the back first. I have noticed you, yeah. Come on. This is your chance. No one at the back. Then there's somebody there. A gentleman on the other. Oh, yeah, you have it over there. Okay.
Sure. Catherine Harrington with the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights, and thank you to ISI and all of you for all the work that you've put to make this happen. My question is for Ms. Kumaraswamy. Thank you for all of your amazing efforts to fight statelessness and support the rights of the Rohingya people. My question is related to gender discrimination and nationality laws, which is what I focus on. So the question for you is something that I think about all the time, and thank you again for raising this important issue. Governments that are yet to reform their nationality laws that deny women the right to pass nationality to their children on an equal basis with men believe that it is their sovereign right to keep their nationality laws as they determine as needed, regardless of their commitments under international law. How do you think, and this is a very tough question, that such governments can be convinced that this is not only not in their interest, but that their obligations require that they uphold citizens' equal right to pass nationality to their children and spouses? So thank you, and apologies for the admittedly difficult question.
Well, actually, this has been an international obligation on many fronts. I think in the 1950s, there was a nationality convention that required that women be treated equally to men, and under CEDAW equality provisions. So there's a lot of international laws and standards. But I find this issue it happened in my country for some time, and many of us, finally the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the women. But I must say that it seems to strike some raw primordial nerve, this idea of not that if men marry foreigners, immediately they get citizenship, but the fact that the women have married foreigners seems to have some major issue for men of the country. First, whether it's an act of disloyalty, I don't know, but also then to also accept their children. And so it's really a completely irrational impulse. So one hopes with time and awareness, and we had cases, really very sad cases where the stupidity of the law of this position seemed so self-evident. And when those cases were brought before the court, it was the court decided strongly. So maybe one way to do it is if there is an independent judiciary to bring actual cases where you see how this law impacts a family, and especially if a woman is fully employed in the country and giving her services to the country, and the husband is being a house husband or bringing up the children, which was the two cases we brought forward. They were holding prominent positions in the country. Maybe that's one way of trying and force this issue as well. Maybe the judicial, in Sri Lanka it was the courts that finally made the decision under the equality provision of the Constitution.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Parsu Sharma Luitel. I'm from Melbourne, a former Bhutanese refugee and stateless person. My question is to the panel. When the third country resettlement was done for refugees by the UNHCR, and the refugees are resettled in the host countries, then it is assumed that these people would get the nationality right of that country, and they become a citizen. In many of the cases I'm referring to the Bhutanese cases, they have become. But in Denmark, nearly 500 refugees are resettled. This morning I got a message from Denmark, 2 of them have only become citizenship. Rest of them, they can't be citizenship. For example, they need to travel to US for the relatives' death and funerals. They don't have any nationality right. So the ending of statelessness means once refugees are resettled, we assume that the statelessness ends at some point in time. They will acquire the citizenship of the host country. It looks a very difficult case in Denmark. What's your opinion in that? Thank you so much.
So I can't speak to the specifics of the situation in Denmark. What I can tell you is from a broader experience, in particular in work that we've done together with the European Network on Statelessness across Europe. And it's very clear, it comes back to statelessness literacy. Often the barriers continue even when residence is sorted out, and even indeed in resettlement programs. For the simplest and silliest of reasons, for instance, a naturalization procedure that requires you to present a foreign passport in order to put in the application. And this is the case, I know, in the Netherlands for people who do not have a determined nationality and who haven't been recognized as stateless. They cannot naturalize because they are told to go away and come back with their foreign passport as proof of identity. So having met all of the criteria, the substantive criteria for naturalization, this lack of statelessness literacy and the fact that the procedure doesn't have just that one adjustment is creating a blockade. And this is what we see across procedures in countries all through Europe. And it's the same for birth registration, it's the same for marriage registration. Any interaction with the state that requires the expected possession of certain documents, if you're stateless and you don't have them, neither can you meet those requirements, nor are you necessarily treated as someone with a very reliable story, because it's to you to explain your statelessness and to sort out the statelessness illiteracy. And that's very hard for the best of us, let alone for someone who feels uncertain about their interactions with the state. So there's an enormous job still to be done there.
Hi. My name is Tunkin. I'm a Rohingya, and I'm leading Burmese Rohingya organization UK. My grandfather was a member of parliament during democratic period time of Burma, and my mother's grandfather was the first judge northern Arkan state. I was not recognized as a citizen of Burma because of 1982 citizenship law. So today I'm stateless in our own state, and my question is leading to Honorable Keynote Speaker Radhika. And thank you very much for your powerful statement, and it is really encouraging. And I would like to, as we have always contact with the camps or genocide survivors, and when I visited, also you visited there, what we heard the first thing from them is justice, and they want to return their own homeland with dignity, protection, and full citizenship rights. And today, unfortunately, it's more than 1.5 years now, almost 2 years, and second anniversary is coming soon. We still justice issues we can't see. We are a kind of deadlock on ICC. And what do you think about the message to Rohingya refugee, our brothers and sisters, to the camps? And you have been fact-finding mission, and we have seen the report is crime against humanity, genocide, and war crimes, and never again international community said. What will be your message to the international community? Thank you very much. Sorry, it might be a hard question, so.
Thank you. I didn't today speak on the whole issue of crimes, such as genocide, war crimes, and because I thought sometimes they overwhelm the narrative, and I think there are other issues such as documentation and rights and all that all therefore get lost in these. But with regard to the crimes, as you know, the ICC took cognizance and the judges also agreed. So there is an ICC process that is also begun. We have, as you know, given our report over in September, and the council, a very united council, voting 35-5, decided to set up a prosecuting authority, as you know, IIMM, which will basically create files of people who we have identified as possible people who may have committed these crimes. And they will also do their independent investigation. They have appointed that person to head that mechanism. So these are small things. So what is missing is the political action of the Security Council or setting up of any ad hoc tribunal. But these cases would be ready in case the tribunal is set up, or these files would be ready, or in case any of the generals go traveling to countries that have universal jurisdiction. We were, people ask this justice. Many people are very skeptical about the justice path and why are you going down this route and people should move on. But that was our first demand. When we went in September, that was an absolute demand. That was before any organization was there. These people were being mobilized in any particular way. That was their demand. They wanted justice. So this was not something being imposed on them. It was really an absolute demand, and to this day they want it. Even this time, as you know, we went to report back, and so it's hard to move on if the people themselves want it. And I think, and when we went and did our investigations, we didn't go into Myanmar, but satellite imagery, as well as that we had over 800 people we interviewed, including people we sat in Thailand. They came from Myanmar at great risk to give evidence. Once you hear those things and see those things, it's so horrendous that there has to be some way the world says something. Or these things will occur again in some other part of the world. So I think it's important. So we are a firm believer, though whether that'll push Myanmar away, ASEAN's argument always has been this will push Myanmar more and more away. I don't know.
I thought I saw the hand of a lady back there.
I have a question that nobody can answer. So I've stopped asking it. And it's not that I don't understand things. I understand lots of things. I understand things better than most kids my age. My mom says that, thank you. My mom says that I understand things better than she does. But that's probably because she can't read. But also because she's my mom and all of that. But hey, I think it's important to try and understand things for yourself. That's what I think. For example, I think that the world is divided into two, that we live in two worlds. And it's not that one world, so these two worlds are for kids and adults. But it's not that one world is full of toys and colors and shorter lisping people and stuff. No, it's more like we live in two different worlds that are made up of two different types of rules, where there's one set of rules for the kids, and then another set of rules for you adults, but for the very same thing. And it's almost like we are taught about a world that you don't really believe in, you know? Because in school, we're taught that governments are good and policemen look after people and that every child is special and every person is equal. Nothing about my life has been like this. And it was confusing. It was confusing for a long time until I decided adults lie. You lie all the time. And once you figure that out, all of this makes sense. My mother, she likes to take me with her when we have to go out and sort out our lives. This generally means a lot of time spent standing in queues and filling out forms and writing out letters and telling our story over and over and over again. My mother never seems to get tired of telling our story. I'm frankly sick of it. But my mother, she knows how to tell our story. She knows the voice, the expression, all of it. It's like clicking a switch. So, tell us your story. Click. It's like that. Man, she's told us stories so many times to so many different people that we know we'll never meet again. She's been asking the same questions that she's been asking for all my life, and that's more than 14 years. But she still asks every single question, every single time, just in case one of them might be answered differently. Whenever we have to go out and sort out our lives, Mama gets me to take this documents file with us. This file is the most important file in the house. And before and after every meeting, she gets me to count the documents in this documents file. There are 63 documents without the photocopies. She always says, if there's a bomb or a fire or a storm or anything, first, pick up the documents file. My mom, she's dead proud of me. I keep winning all sorts of certificates in school. I have certificates for almost every subject that I've studied. This is because studying comes easy to me. I remember there was this one certificate that I did for a speech. I gave a speech on my country. I spoke of this country like I belonged here. My teacher said it was brilliant. But she sounded more sad than proud, and she couldn't really look me in the eye. When I was younger, I used to make my own certificates. This is to certify that XX completed YY on this day, and I would sign it. My mother got certificates for all sorts of things she used to do for us. And my father, he got certificates for smiling and making jokes. This was to encourage him to do this more often. My father's a horrible man. I wish she would leave him. But Mama says our problems would be so much greater if she were on her own. I don't quite see how. Living with him is so difficult. But she says until the laws of countries treat women the same way they treat men, a woman will always have to keep a man by her. These are the kind of grown-up things that I know about. I worry about my younger sister. I love her very much, and I wouldn't change her for anything except that this world is so cruel to girls. She has a very funny understanding of the world. She likes to believe that different countries are different colors. And I think this is because the world map in her classroom, on that the different countries are colored in different colors. And I tried to explain to her this is not really how the world is, but she really believes if from space you look back at Earth, you do see all these colors. And she loves telling people that our father is from a green country and that our mother is from a purple country where we live, where we were born. She tells everyone that this is our country. My sister is still young. Man. This is one of those places, I think, where kids' rules and adults' rules begin to part. Because we are taught by adults that we're taught by adults to tell the truth and to be kind and to be responsible. But the truth is that I am a human being. And kindness is to assure my mother that I will always be treated like I am a human being. And responsibility is for you to give me a certificate telling me that I am a human being so that I can stop standing in queues and filling out forms and writing out letters and being shouted at by strangers and being beaten by my dad and just to stop worrying. And to start living, because really, all these problems, they'll stop for us forever. I don't need help with any of our other problems, you know. Any other problem, I can figure out how to fix. I'm not afraid. I have certificates that tell me I can run and play the cello and reason better and count better and remember better and the best in my school and in my grade and in the country. But none of these really matter. When my mother tells our story, she speaks the words, but her heart, it leaves her body. And I watch her. She becomes very, very small and very, very empty. And I realize that my mother's heart leaves when it cannot bear to hope. So what in the world makes it so difficult to admit that I am born? What makes that so difficult? I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I asked one of those questions that I promised myself I'd never ask. Silly me. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Shaliana, for what you have just told us. That sense, the need to belong, the sense of the belonging that you want to see realized, and how you notice in your mother that she has half given up the ideal of belonging and that desire being fulfilled. And it shows us, I think it's a tremendously good message for all of us as we go for our break, to realize how important belonging is. And that is, I think, one of our key messages, that every human being has a sense, has the right to belong, and we should work towards realizing that. Thank you very much. We're going for a break now until 12:30, so we have about 25 minutes for coffee, right? 11:30.